Hi, I'm Sean Perrin, and you're listening to episode 71 of the Clarinet Podcast, the show where I discuss all that's new and neat with clarinet with the neatest people in the industry. In today's episode of the podcast, I'm going to be releasing part 1 of 2 of the previously unreleased sections of the podcast that were exclusive to Patreon backers. Now, I did discuss in the 100,000 download celebration episode sort of why I'm doing this. If you want a detailed explanation, you can check that out. But basically, I just felt that the Patreon backers and those supporting the podcast, such as my sponsors, I felt like it would make sense that the full podcast was available to all people, not just portions made private for certain people who could afford to support it. So if you're not familiar with what the lightning round is, it's a set of 7 short questions, well, 6 sometimes, and I've recently added a new one actually, but 6 to 7 short questions which I ask every guest if we have time at the end of the conversation. At the end of today's episode, I'm also featuring a section that I included in episode 65, which was sort of my Clarinet Fest wrap-up episode, and I did share my thoughts on how to get to Clarinet Fest to and from on a budget for students or anyone else who is trying to travel with limited resources. So today's episode will feature episode 68 with Brad Bain, episode 67 with Charles Nidick, and we'll get to it right after this short message from our sponsor, D'Addario Woodwinds. Sanding, shaping, balancing. For centuries, mastering your instrument meant mastering these crafts too. But now, D'Addario is refining craftsmanship for the 21st century by refining their reeds and mouthpieces with the world's most innovative techniques, so you can spend less time sanding, shaping, and balancing, and more time perfecting your own craft. To learn more about the new era of craftsmanship from D'Addario Woodwinds, visit D'Addario.com/woodwinds. So, Brad, the first question is, if I were to go have a look at your music stand right now, what would I find on it?
That's a good question. The next concert program, I actually just got the folder, and it's got some notes on there that I need to reacquaint myself with. So that's the first thing. What is the rep? Hindemith Symphonic Metamorphosis and Barber Violin Concerto, and something else by Ligeti. I don't remember what the name of it is, but it's got a lot of noodles in it. So
Atmospheres?
I don't know. I can't remember. I just know that I got to practice it. And then underneath the folder, I've got a couple of duet books, which I like to play whenever I've got a friend in town. And the Behrman scales, those are always on my stand. And I think the Rose Etudes, admittedly, I haven't played them in a little while, but those speak to me.
Got a big music stand.
Yeah, typically the music that I'm practicing on always falls off because there's barely any shelf space.
Fair enough. What album or piece of music changed your life irreversibly?
Oh, when I was in high school, I got 2 albums. Can I give you 2?
Okay.
They were records. One was the Marcellus performance of the Mozart Clarinet Concerto. I don't even know it was on the other side of that record. I can't remember. Might have been the Mozart Symphonia Concertante or something like that. But the Mozart Concerto, Marcellus, George Zell recording is the definitive. It was then, and I think it still is. And unbeknownst to me at the time, I would eventually become a student of Marcellus's. So that record spoke to me in a very profound way. The other one was Harold Wright playing the Mozart Clarinet Quintet. So 2 Mozarts. I do love Mozart. Mozart was a big influence on me. What can I say? I love the Appoggiatura.
Great answers. If you could meet any composer or musician from any time period, alive or no longer with us, who would it be and why?
Well, I'm such a clarinet geek, I have to go to Harold Wright. I grew up in Massachusetts, where the Boston Symphony is. It's one of the greatest concert halls in the world, and Harold Wright was the clarinetist during my formative years on the clarinet. And I used to hear him on radio broadcasts, as well as I was privileged enough. My parents took me to the symphony, and I heard him live. And unbeknownst to me, he was a clarinet player, and that's the way the clarinet should sound. Well, later on, as I heard more clarinetists, I learned that he was a very special man, a very special player with a very special approach and sound, and that would become the greatest inspiration to me. And if I could sit down and geek out with reeds and mouthpieces and clarinet and hear him face to face at this point in my life, it would be extremely special for me.
So while we're kind of back in time, what advice would you give your 20-year-old self?
Pause as I think. I wanted to say, be yourself. But I worry that when I was 20, I didn't really know who I was as a musician yet, because I needed 20 more years to let what I learned imprint or unfold, unwind. So that 20-year-old self, I'll stay with it though. Be yourself, be strong, and remember the good stuff that you learned from your teachers.
Yeah, I guess be yourself, but adapt to yourself. In a way, is that kind of what you mean?
I think so. I'm not sure I know what I mean anymore, but
I think I know what you mean. I think I get it.
Okay, good.
If you could play any instrument other than the clarinet, which one would it be and why?
Oboe.
Oh,
The oboe.
Wow, that's a new one.
Yeah.
Why?
Because I love the oboe. I think the oboe is such an expressive instrument. A good oboe player is an inspiration to me. Mark Lifshe's playing, every time I hear it, it just makes me so excited. He's gone now, but I also think of the oboe. Remember, I mentioned concentration and focus being everything, the seed that starts the clarinet tone. And I think that the oboe is inherently a focused and concentrated sounding instrument, and that speaks to me. And so I'll go so far as, this is going to take more than 1 minute. I'll try to be brief.
That's okay.
I'll go so far as to say that when I speak with clarinetists on the mouthpiece thing, the first thing I want to do is get inside their head. What are they looking for? Are you looking for an E or an O or an Ah? What is your vowel sound? Well, for me, the sound has to be, there are two resonances. There's the horn resonance, the O, and there's the oboe resonance, E. And so you take those two things together and you blend them and you get clarinet. We'll start with the E and I'll go to O. So if we dial from the horn back down to the sweet spot, which is right down in the middle, that's the sound that I'm looking for, where you have a beautifully integrated combination of the two, the big resonance, the O of the horn, and the concentrated focal center of the ni of the oboe. And the oboe, again, is such an artistically sweet and expressive voice in the orchestra. I find it to be very inspirational.
That's such an interesting answer. I appreciate the demonstration too. I felt exactly what you meant. Very
good.
Cool.
I wasn't sure if it was coming across.
Yeah, it was very cool, actually. So the last question here is, what is one book that all clarinetists should read?
I don't think there is one.
Not even just like to help them, artistically or...
Yeah.
Or let's change it. What is your favorite book?
Yeah, I don't have one.
Okay.
That's the thing. I've read a lot of the old books. When I was in college, I read, the acoustic Benet books, and skimmed through a lot of it was beyond me. And then there was the Jack Brymer book and Stubbins book. And basically, I took the stuff that was good, the stuff that meant something to me, and I discarded the stuff that wasn't meaningful to me, and it just sort of added up all of these different books to create a basic kind of impression. But the biggest book for me is the book of life and experience, and it goes back to that conversation I had with my old student friends. What was the stuff that Hastie and Marcellus didn't teach me? Mm-hmm. And the ripple effect, that the resonance to that statement is that, but there's so much more than what anybody ever learned, or from a teacher, or anybody read from a book. The art of clarinet playing cannot be taught from a book.
Yes. Yeah. No, and I think we definitely should.
Sounding like a cynic about it, frankly, lately I've wished I've had more time to read and to enjoy that side of life, but instead I've been having a ball on the bench of practical. The knocks of life that come from the job haven't been knocks at all. They've been a thrill.
As mentioned, that was Bradford Bain from episode 68, and if you haven't checked out the full-length episode for that one, definitely make sure you do so. He shared some absolutely incredible insights into his working method and his life as a player, and even just as a human being. Really great guy, and I absolutely am really, really enjoying his new mouthpiece. So, next up is Charles Nidick, who, again, just shared extremely insightful information. This was from episode 67 of the podcast, and I hope you enjoy his responses to the lightning round. If I were to walk over to your music stand right now, what would I find on it?
You would find, in fact, Elliott Carter duet, which is called Hioku, for 2 clarinets, because we're going to have to play that very soon.
Fair enough. What piece of music or album changed your life indefinitely?
Oh, that is something I cannot answer in 1 minute, because there are many that I can think of. But I have to say that my father, who was a wonderful clarinetist and a wonderful musician, was very interested in new music, and probably one of the earliest recordings when I was not even a teenager was a recording of Stravinsky's Les Noces. Mm-hmm. That's a cantata for 4 pianos, percussion, solo singers, and chorus. And that really, I thought, was so amazing, that piece, that I think that gave me my initial spur to curiosity about new things.
Oh, wow. That's really interesting insight. I know that we didn't talk much about your musical upbringing, but I do know that you started with several other instruments and then chose clarinet, so this might not be the greatest question for you, but if you could play any instrument other than clarinet, which would it be and why?
Oh, I'd be the piano, although I do play the piano. But the piano is my hobby. I would say that I would play that as a serious professional instrument, if I were not playing the clarinet. And the other instrument I would play would be the viola.
The viola? Oh, interesting.
Yeah, which I also studied.
Yes.
So, but I was never very good at it, but it was, good enough to play in my high school orchestra.
Wow. So you've had a lot of different... what about other than the 3 that you have played?
Well, that's actually very interesting, because I would love to play some folk instruments, like the Armenian duduk, for instance.
Very obscure.
Yeah, it's very obscure, but incredibly beautiful instrument.
Yes.
And it's played always with circular breathing.
Always?
Yeah.
Interesting.
It's very, very interesting. Yeah. So that's something like that. Or there are Indian classical instruments I would love to play. I would more gravitate toward these kind of folk instruments.
Very interesting. If you could go back in time and meet any person, musical or otherwise, who would it be and why?
Oh, God, you have very difficult questions.
Planned this way on purpose.
To tell you, probably I would say Beethoven.
Beethoven?
Yeah. I mean, my first thought was Mozart, of course. I mean, for the clarinet, and although maybe I would revert to Mozart again, because Mozart experimented with combinations of clarinets and basset horns at the end of his life, and I think that he was trying to find a combination of clarinets which would function like a string quartet. And I would love to go back in time and encourage him.
Interesting. So that we talk to him about that.
Yeah, would have if he would have written one major work for a combination of clarinets and basset horns, I think the history of wind music would be different in the world.
We're going to go over a minute here, but in what way? Do you think that those instruments would have gained more prominence?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that they would have gained more prominence, and just as the string quartet has become, such a preeminent chamber group, this combination that Mozart would have found, would have become something like that as well. Because what we don't realize so easily is that just about everything that Mozart did was in a certain sense revolutionary, in that no one had quite done it before. And with string quartets a little bit different, because you had at the same time Haydn writing and Mozart, but before them you don't really have string quartets. Even.
Yeah.
So this is the beginning of something that became incredibly the important foundation of Western chamber music.
For this question, I should almost open up other timelines. One of the most interesting answers I got to this one on the podcast, I can't remember who said it now, but they said they wanted to go back and meet Mozart at 50 if he had lived, which would have been...
Right, of course.
They felt like he would have become almost Beethoven, ahead of Beethoven's time. So... Anyways, while we're back in time here, what advice would you give to your 21-year-old self?
Continue in the same direction, I have to say.
That's great advice.
That's as I look back, that's what I would say.
And what is one book that you think everyone should read, or if maybe it's too broad, maybe a book that would help musicians on their own personal musical journey or understanding of music?
Oh, well, if we're just talking about music itself, the book I would recommend would be Charles Rosen's The Classical Style. And this is maybe not the book of all time or for all time, but for a musician, I think it's a very, very important and illuminating book.
Do you have a suggestion as well for a more general book?
There I have hundreds. Now this is very, very difficult. I think something like the Brothers Karamazov of Dostoevsky that comes to mind immediately. And also Wittgenstein's Philosophical Investigations.
Wonderful. I'll put links to those.
Two different kinds of, totally different kinds of things. But,
yes.
I think Wittgenstein is very important to learn how to think.
I really love Charles Nidek's take on a lot of stuff, especially his sort of philosophy towards music. And if you did check out that episode, he was talking about his upcoming Wah concert series that was going to be happening in New York City. And the first concert from that series has already occurred. So if you are in New York or you're traveling there in the next few months, make sure to check out his website and the original show notes for episode 67, where we do discuss this at length. So finally, I'd like to bring you a little bit of a discussion I had on episode 65 about how to get to and from Clarinet Fest on a budget, assuming you are in the States or in some relatively nearby country. I did travel to several Clarinet Fests now, once as a student and twice on a rather limited budget, and this was my thoughts. So traveling to Clarinet Fest on a budget was a topic that has come up several times. I encountered several people on Facebook who were saying things like, oh, I really wish I could have gone to Clarinet Fest, but I just can't afford it, and all sorts of different things. And the fact of the matter is, if you are a student and you have some friends and a means to get there other than flying, you can probably do it on a very, very good budget. Now, unfortunately, I'm in Canada, so I'm unable to drive with a bunch of friends in a car. But for my first Clarinet Fest when I was a student, it was 2007 or 8 out at Vancouver. And that was actually a very interesting time because if I recall correctly, a lot of the Bakun stuff had just been released. Bakun was or is in Vancouver, and it was sort of just an interesting ultra-Canadian experience. I remember watching also at sort of the campus bar, Tom Pawalski was playing across the street, and they're doing some Klezmer music. It was just a really laid-back, wonderful time, and the performances were all in the Chan Center. So anyways, that's a lot about that. But the fact of the matter is, I traveled there extremely cheaply because me and a couple other friends piled in the car and drove out to Vancouver at the cost of basically a tank of gas. And then what we did was we stayed at the UBC residence for, I think it was like $15 or $20 a night. And then you just ate as, responsibly as you could. And you can do the whole trip very, very reasonably. When I went to Lawrence, Kansas last year, same thing. I wanted to go down there really on a budget. The podcast was new. I wasn't quite sure which direction it would go in. I wasn't quite sure if people would care, honestly. And but I wanted to go down there and take it all in for myself. Again, it'd been quite some time. And so I did the same thing. I stayed in the residence at the Lawrence University. I can't remember the exact name of it right now. But I stayed in the residence there, $20 a night. I ate all the meals I could in the residence dining hall kind of area. For $6, you could get like a coffee and a breakfast, and it was just fantastic. Really, really great food, actually. That southern-ish sort of hospitality, I guess, really does have some meaning. And, but, so we're talking like $40, $50 a day if you're really frugal. Given the value of not only getting to trial the products I was talking about, but, meeting people, connecting, looking back and having the great memories of it, I just think it's a fantastic investment in your career as a clarinetist. So travel with friends in a car if you can, and stay at the university if you can. That's close by. A lot of universities actually rent out their campuses for the summer. This doesn't apply. This is just good advice, anyways. Actually, I travel like this a lot. I went to Montreal last year to see Radiohead and stayed in downtown Montreal for like 30 or $40 a night at the Concordia University, which was just awesome. So, by the way, if anyone's wondering what happened to that interview with Laurie Friedman, there was a problem with my microphone, and it just didn't work out great. So it just never got released. So I'll have to talk to her again at some point and see if we can do another conversation. But anyways, I know what you're thinking, and that is, what if it's like this year where there's no university close by and the best you can do is to stay at the hotel? Well, that's where the friends also come in. I mean, if you're willing to split a bed or a room with somebody, the rooms at the event here were not cheap. I think it was around $100 and something, maybe $160 US a night, which for me just kills me with the exchange rate. But anyways, if you pack 3 or 4 people into a room, you're talking, again, you're down to the $40-ish range per day, which is not completely unreasonable. And, maybe there's even other ways to do this if you can think of someone close by who lives in the city. But I would caution against that. A lot of people, they can become a little too frugal, and then they're just wasteful of their time. At Clarinet Fest, you're going to want to be networking. You're not going to want to be trying to navigate public transit at 6 in the morning to get to a session and then miss it. I mean, you came there for the session, you came there for the events, you came there for everything. You should really try and either stay on site or as close as humanly possible. So the other thing that you want to think about, and if money is really an issue, if you're really wondering how you can get there, this is something I also did last year. Volunteer. They will, or they have the past couple of years. I don't want to, put words in their mouth, but I believe this will continue. But the International Clarinet Association will actually give you a festival pass in exchange for volunteering. Now, this has significant value. It's worth around $200 and something, right? So you have to volunteer between 10 and 20 hours, but it's great to put on your resume. What a wonderful thing to say you went to another city and volunteered for an international conference. Like, that's really a great thing at any point in your career to put on your resume. And then you get to take in, as many things as you would like, really. I mean, as long as you can fit them around your volunteering schedule, you're totally good to go. Another great benefit of that is that you'll meet people. I was going out there. I was staying with Eric Salazar, which honestly was a bit of a gamble because we'd never met in real life before, just through the podcast. But we got along just great and split a room at the dorm. But then I also met some really fantastic other people who I honestly otherwise would probably not have met if it hadn't been for the volunteering. So I don't know. There's some great travel tips for getting to Clarinet Fest on a budget. Basically, get some friends to pile in, clarinet friends, clarinerd friends, whatever you want to call them. Pile into the car, share the room if you can, eat cheaply, and volunteer. You could honestly get to a Clarinet Fest for under $500, even if it's across the country, if you live in the States. Well, that's it for today's episode of the podcast. Be sure to tune in next time where I'll be sharing the lightning rounds from Ricardo Morales, Eugene Mondi, and actually I'm going to be answering the lightning round questions because I realized that I don't think anyone's asked them of me yet, and I want to kind of give a sneak preview of the AMA episodes, which means Ask Me Anything, which will be exclusive to Patreon backers going forward. There's some other bonus content that will be on there, and I want to thank our latest backers, Alfonso Chen, Brett Pimentel, and Anders Nelson for helping support the show. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Clarinet Podcast. Detailed show notes can be found at clarinet.com. If you find that you're enjoying the podcast and that you do find it valuable, please consider supporting it to the degree that you do find it valuable. If you want to treat it like an extra cup of coffee once a week or once a month or maybe an extra read, you can do this at www.clarinet.com/Patreon. Your support is truly appreciated and helps me continue to produce the podcast into the future. The podcast is also brought to you by our sponsor, D'Addario Woodwinds.
Sanding, shaping, balancing. For centuries, mastering your instrument meant mastering these crafts too. But now, D'Addario is refining craftsmanship for the 21st century by refining their reeds and mouthpieces with the world's most innovative techniques, so you can spend less time sanding, shaping, and balancing, and more time perfecting your own craft. To learn more about the new era of craftsmanship from D'Addario Woodwinds, visit D'Addario.com/Woodwinds.